India, a victim of terrorism sponsored by Pakistan, gave a befitting reply after the UNHCR commissioner stated that human rights violations have been occurring in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and also it has been carried out by security forces in a report released recently. European academics and experts too targeted Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism while highlighting factual and analytical errors of report on Jammu and Kashmir by UNHCR at Geneva. We have a report.
Pakistan, which has a notorious reputation of being a global sponsor of terrorism in the world, was slammed in the 39th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva for its continuous attempts to sponsoring of terrorist groups which create havoc in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir since 1989. On June 14 this year, the UNHCR published a biased report which mentioned that the Indian security forces have used excessive force in Kashmir and killed and wounded numerous civilians since 2016. India directly targeted the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid Rad Al Hussein, after he called on Human Rights Council to set up an international investigation following the release of the UN report on human rights violation in Kashmir. UN had called for an international inquiry into the alleged violations in the disputed territory. The report was low on facts and was likely a product of China-Pakistan connivance. At the time, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs said that the UN report on the human rights situation in the province violates India's sovereignty and integrity and declared that India will continue to take measures to deal with cross-border terrorism in Kashmir. The report was slammed and criticized by many experts around the globe for its narrow view on the Kashmir issue.
India exercises its right of reply to the statement made by Pakistan under this agenda. We reject Pakistan's continued reference to the fallacious and motivated report, which India has outrightly rejected. We deplore Pakistan's repeated and malicious propaganda to distract the world from its gross violation of human rights, especially in the territories under its control.
At the 38th session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva last year, India called upon UN to reject the efforts made by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to legitimize terrorism and call for India's dismemberment through the recent report on Kashmir in defiance of the very definition of terror outlined by the global body.
The Council may note that concerns have been raised by the international community on the absence of constitutional and civil rights of the people of Gilgit-Baltistan and their sufferings due to the deliberate economic policies causing extreme poverty, gross underdevelopment and economic hardships, large-scale repression, enforced disappearances, and extrajudicial killings continue with impunity in Sindh, Baluchistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
This year, an event was organized titled Preventing and Combating Growing Terrorism in South Asia, which was chaired by Dr. Paul Stott, lecturer at the University of Leicester in the Center for International Studies and Diplomacy at the SOAS, discussed a range of issues primarily focusing on Pakistan's strategic interests and the flaws of the recent report on Jammu and Kashmir by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR. The meeting saw discussions on the number of analytical and methodological flaws of the published report and the implications that had not been expressed well, as the report only manages to cover the period of June 2016 to April 2018.
Historically, there was a lot of errors in the report, particularly historically, as he didn't really seem to have grasped that many of the terrorist organisations operating in Indian Kashmir are really proxy organisations for the Pakistan state, and as such are given really their lifeblood by that nation state. Terrorist groups in the very long term don't tend to prosper unless they have a safe haven or have some degree of support, connivance from nation states.
Key issue also raised during the discussion was a lack of proper terminology used for terror groups and organizations in the report. The OCHCR report on Kashmir which has the mention of armed groups instead of terror groups. The speaker even went on to highlight an immense understatement of the different terror groups' action in the region and stress that ironically the UNOHCR report referred to groups such as the Hizbul Mujahideen, Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish Mohammad as armed groups, which are designated as terrorist organizations by the United Nations.